Thank you very much for that kind introduction. You'll see from my title that, well, I've been working on for too long, for some years, on a book on Abhidharma, which is trying to look at aspects of both Theravada and Sarvastivada, and even a little bit of Yogacara Abhidharma. Not an ambitious project, you'll see. That's why it's taken me rather longer than it should have. And when I got this invitation, I was struggling with Abhidharma accounts of the process of death and rebirth, and the Abhidharma Kosha account of the intermediate existence, the Antarabhava. So I thought how appropriate to link that topic to the Evans lecture. So hence this particular topic. It's, I mean, what I want to do this evening is focus on two general themes. I mean, one is simply articulating and trying to understand the logic of especially the account of death and rebirth and the intermediate existence in Abhidharma Buddhism, in Buddhist systematic thought. And I also, let's see if my clicker works. No, it doesn't. It did work. So maybe I'll just do this. Maybe the battery died or something. So apart from the topic, my other theme is basically intellectual exchange and the parallels between Buddhist thought, I mean, in very broad terms in the north, and I'm just going to use the word Sarvastivada without getting into complicated things about the different schools exactly. So it's a kind of a general term for affiliated schools and so forth that flourished in the north, and Theravada flourishing. It seems to have moved slightly, but of course Theravada was active in South India with significant authors, especially of Abhidhamma texts, probably being South Indians. So I'm interested in, as I say, the topic and the parallels in cultural and intellectual exchange, which I want to try and illustrate, especially towards the end, between North and South, between, if you like, Theravada Buddhism and, broadly speaking, Sarvastivada, the Sarvastivada intellectual tradition. Obviously, this topic of the Antarabhava, a lot of work quite in the relative recent past has been done by Robert Kritzer. So I'm obviously building on what he's done. I think I have a slightly different take on some of the arguments, and I'm hoping to complement what he does by bringing in a little more clearly the exchange between North and South on this particular topic. So I'm going to begin by saying something about karma. I mean, karma and rebirth are two ideas that are widely accepted in the Indian intellectual tradition. Perhaps only one school of philosophy, the Charvakas, rejected the idea. All the other Indian schools of religious and philosophical thought accepted this basic idea of death and rebirth and karma. At the beginning, I think it's worth grasping the scale of rebirth, the idea of the round of rebirth, samsara, in Indian thought, that it has no beginning and no obvious end, and it's vast, vast numbers of lives over countless eons. And that's an important aspect to this, which I find nicely picked up. It's always nice to quote Borges on something. So nicely picked up in his story, The Immortal where he says, or the narrator of the story says, of the wheel of certain Hindustani religions, it has neither beginning nor end. Each life is the effect of the preceding and engenders the following, but none determines the totality. In an infinite period of time, all things happen to all men. Because of his past or future virtues, every man is worthy of all goodness, but also of all perversity, because of his infamy in the past or future. I think what that captures, in a way, is with this huge, vast scale, of course, that the doctrine of karma and rebirth has a certain kind of leveling effect. We're all equals. It's no longer a world of good guys and bad guys. Everybody is equally good and bad, and equally deserving of unpleasant things happening to them and pleasant things happening to them, which is an important, I think, aspect of the way Abhidharma, or background to the way Abhidharma and Buddhist systematic thought begins to talk about karma and rebirth. There is, I mean, it's interesting to know that with reference to, or register with reference to Abhidharma accounts of death and rebirth and karma, that they complicate it, as Abhidharma always does, but with reason, I think. And their point then being that actually we can say a certain amount about karma and the different types of karma and the way karma works and how rebirth works, but in the end, only a Buddha can understand exactly how this works. No one can really get their mind round exactly why something happens, why a particular thing happens to a particular person or being at a particular time. So there's a certain kind of tension in the system between the way in which karma and rebirth is sort of deterministic, fatalistic, but also saying that there are opportunities and things you can do at various points to change your destiny. So just to begin with the basics, perhaps it's worth attempting a definition of karma. I mean, obviously karma is action, but in this particular context, karma is the way in which our actions, once done, linger with us. And they linger with us until, at some point, for some reason, they bear fruit. And they bear fruit in terms of, in Abhidharma terms, they bear fruit with either pleasant or unpleasant results. So good karma has a pleasant result, bad karma has an unpleasant result. And in Abhidharma, this is reduced very clearly to basically good karma gives you, means that you see nice colors, hear nice sounds, smell nice smells, taste nice tastes, and have pleasant bodily sensations. Bad karma means that you see horrible colors, hear horrible sounds, smell nasty smells, taste horrible things, and have painful bodily sensations. So that's the basic understanding of how karma is conceived in Abhidharma terms. So these karmic fruits, in a way, the thing about them is that they have nothing to do with the original purpose of why we did actions. It's something else. They bear this particular kind of effect. So Buddhist karma, however, is, I mean, well, karma, as we say, is action, so it's what we say and do, but Buddhist karma is that'll do. Buddhist karma is famously reduced to chaitana, intention. So something in the mind, not just what you do or say. And this is particularly borne out in this list of the so-called 10 courses of action. These are the bad courses of action. So obviously you have 3 courses of action at the end that are entirely conceived of in mental terms. So they're still courses of action, but coveting, ill will, and wrong view are basically karma exclusively on the mental level, on the mind level, whereas all the other 7 are, of course, the mind resulting, the intention being strong enough such that it makes you do or say something. So karma is not only what we say and do, it is also just what we think. So this reduction of karma to what you think and seeing that as primary makes karma in a way potentially omnipresent in our lives. Maybe it's everything you think and do, because everything you think and do has cetana, intention, volition behind it. So this could be a slightly scary thought. In fact, the Abhidharma does make the move to saying that cetana, volition, will, or intention, in both the Theravada and Sarvastivada systems is universal. That is, it's present in every episode of consciousness. So you're all sitting here, and every episode of consciousness from an Abhidharma point of view has this intention or will. So you're creating karma, or are you? They then step back a little bit from saying this and saying that all episodes of consciousness have this will, but not all episodes of consciousness have it in a kind of active sense. So all cetana in every episode has the characteristic of willing, they say, but only wholesome and unwholesome cetana has the function of exerting or getting you to act in some way. But that's still quite a lot of episodes of consciousness. And so what it means, in effect, is that every episode of consciousness that you have that is tainted by greed or aversion or delusion, on the bad side, everyone that's tainted with non-attachment, kindness, understanding, is karmic. It will have it's there and it has the potential to bear fruit, an unpleasant or pleasant fruit in the future. So that's a lot of karma we're creating all the time. So, you know, the question arises, though, which karma really matters in all this? Is it all matter in the same kind of way? So you can see this as a kind of ethical, spiritual, religious question that the Abhidharma and Buddhist systematic thinkers need to wrestle with, to kind of say, well, you know, what are we going to do about this, creating all this karma all the time? So sometimes they seem to say things which, you know, are a little bit scary. So they'll say, for example, so even in your dreams, what you do and say in your dreams, this is karma. You are creating karma when you do these things, when you dream these things. But then they say, well, okay, don't worry too much about your dreams. What you do in your dreams doesn't matter that much. So which karma really counts? I think there's a tension in Abhidharma systematic thought and Buddhist narrative thought between wanting to say at times, you know, everything you do is significant in some kind of way, potentially significant, and then saying, well, you only have to worry about some things you do, but then also telling stories about how a minor thing that someone does, just a one-off thing that someone does, has great significance. They like to play with these ideas a little bit. But when we go to systematic Buddhist thought, there are various distinctions they want to make between the different types of karma to try and bring out what types of karma matter and what types don't matter so much. So I just want to look at a few of those distinctions that are made in both Theravada and Sarvastivada. So if we go, I've talked about the Kammapatas or Karmapatas, the courses of karma. So the first distinction is to say that a lot of the karma you do is not a course of karma. It's just idle. So some karma, to be really strong and important, you have to do a complete course, the whole thing. So a complete course for each of the 10 has various conditions. So these are set out more or less the same in both Theravada and Sarvastivada systems. So for example, to complete the course of the karma pata of killing a living being, there has to be a living being. If you don't, if you stab something that's not a living being, it's okay. You haven't completed the course of karma. It has to be a living being. You have to know it's a living being. You have to have the intention to kill. You have to perform the appropriate action, and the living being has to die as a result of your action. If any of those conditions is absent, then it's not the complete course of karma. So that's one way of making distinctions between different types of karma. So the Theravada also introduces other things that make distinctions. So if you kill a very small being, it's not as bad as if you kill a very big being. If you kill a moral being, it's not as bad. It's worse than if you kill some awful being, immoral being. Another thing is the actual strength of now we're back to mental things, the strength of the defilements and the actual effort that you put into the act. The Sarvastivadins give a list of 6 things which contribute to the weight of karma, similar in some ways to what we've just looked at. So the first one is what you do after you've done something. If you may reinforce the act in some kind of way. The object of the act, well, that's the same one as we've already had, what it's actually directed to, what kind of being, how big it is, and so forth. There's the basic nature of the act. Then there's the preparation, premeditation, putting a lot of planning into something tends to make it worse. There's the actual nature of, I think this is about the defilements, again, the actual nature of the defilements, how kind of devious and evil-minded you are, or how virtuous you are in terms of the quality of your intention. Whereas the last one, I think, is to do with the actual strength and force of your intention. So again, all those things can make differences to the nature of the act. Sarvastivadins and the Theravadins both make a distinction between karma based on some of these things that is fixed or invariable in niyata, which means that certain karmas you do, once you've done them, they're going to have a result, whether you like it or not. They're going to hang around until they bear fruit. And within that, some karmas, they qualify it a little bit, so some karmas hang around and they're going to bear fruit in this life, and if they don't bear fruit in this life, it's okay, they become defunct. Some are going to bear fruit in the very next life, and if they don't, they become defunct. And some hang around for an awful long time to bear fruit over countless lifetimes, waiting for their opportunity. Other kinds of karmas, the sort of weaker kinds, are unfixed, variable. They may or may not bear fruit in some way, and they're not so important in that way. And so both those kinds of distinctions are found in both Theravada and Sarvastivada, sometimes understood in slightly different ways and details, which I won't go into. So another distinction that is sort of parallels this in some way in the Sarvastivada, there's karma that is just done, and then there's karma that is accumulated. And the accumulated karma is the one that you have to watch out for. So something that is done very deliberately and intentionally, full deliberation intention. Something that gains a certain kind of completion. Again, this is referring to what you do after, and also that some people do something once and it doesn't seem to take, and they do it again and again. This will be another theme. things that are done so without regret. If you do something bad and you regret it, that seems to soften the effect. So you can see these sort of religious concerns coming in here about how to live with karma. And of course, there's a whole issue, I suppose, of you've done this karma, what do you do? How do you get rid of it? Can you get rid of it? Can you soften it? So this gives you some sort of opportunity. You've done something really bad, well, you can try and make amends. So the next one, by counteracting it by anything. So you can be horrible to someone, but then you can go and apologize or give them a gift and things like that. So there are ways to soften the karma that you are accumulating. A different one, so if you just, the associated action, so if you do something bad and rejoice in it, think, oh, I'm really glad I said that to him, you're making it worse, and so forth. So you've got, again, these kinds of distinctions between these varieties of karma. But when it comes to, when we move on to the question of death and rebirth, it's very clear that both the Theravadins and Sarvastivadins make the same precise point. Of all the karmas you have done in your life, when you come to die, only one of those karmas is going to be the immediate cause for your rebirth linking. Just one of them. And they both use different terminology, but the basic idea is very clear there, that there's one karma linked with one existence, with one rebirth. So the projecting or akshepaka karma in the Sarvastivadins, or the Janaka generating, life rebirth generating karma for the Theravadins. Sorry, I lost my place. So there's this one karma, but they also make a distinction. There are obviously other karmas affecting your rebirth, but they're put in a different category. They are complementary or sort of enhancing karmas. So one karma generates a good or bad rebirth, but the other complementary karmas will make a difference to the quality, to the particular specific quality of that rebirth. So if we were talking about a human rebirth, so good completing karmas, or in the supporting karmas in the Theravada terminology, would make your human rebirth one in which you were healthy and wealthy and so forth. Whereas weaker or bad completing or complementary karmas would make you prone to bad health and so forth. So they're trying to explain various variations using these categories. One thing now, so one particular karma determines your next rebirth, each rebirth. So the question is, as you approach death, which of the various karmas that you have done is going to be the one that, as it were, pops up and conditions your next rebirth? And here we have a list that is basically the same list. In the Theravada sources, it's found in a number of places, which goes usually in the Theravada order. It says there's weighty karma, repeated karma, karma done near to death, and any old karma. And basically, if you've got weighty karma, that inevitably will condition your next rebirth. There's nothing you can do to stop that conditioning your next rebirth. Weighty karma is classically the 5 anantarya karmas. wounding a Buddha, killing an Arhat, killing your father, mother, and causing a schism in the Sangha. There's some perhaps discussion about whether other things can count as weighty karmas. On the good side, it is particularly in the meditation attainments and that sort of thing, but any extraordinary act would qualify as weighty. Repeated karma is obviously a certain kind of habitual karma, things that you do over and over again. Near-death karma is something you do just before you die. And then there are these other karmas hanging around there. The Sarvastivadins, I've only found this basically in one place, at the end of the Abhidharmakosha, chapter 9, the chapter on persons. Vasubandhu, right at the end, mentions this in connection with what happens when you die. And it's basically the same list. Yashomitra has a comment and refers it to the Venerable Rahula, but it's not quite clear what the source is, this list. Because in the Theravada sources, I should say, it's not a sutta source. It's not I can't find the list in the canonical sources. It's an entirely commentarial list, this. But there it is also in the Sarvastivadins. You notice there's the order is slightly different. They give precedence to near death. Interestingly, so this is what Yashomitra says. So in the series that constitutes a being, there are 4 kinds of karma: weighty, near-death, repeated, previously done. Of these 4, weighty karma takes priority and gives results before the other 3. Also of near-death, repeated, and done, near-death takes priority and gives result before the other 2, and so forth. So you've got this, in relationship to the order, you've got this change, but in much later Theravada texts from the 11th century, there's a comment in the Abhidhamma-avatara, 5th century introduction to Abhidhamma by Buddhadatta, and other works. It is habitual karma that is stated as ripening before near-death karma. Yet, when the gate, he gives this simile, when the gate of a cow pen full of cattle is opened, although there are steers and bulls behind, the animal close to the gate of the pen, even if it is a weak old cow, gets out first. Likewise, too, when there are wholesome and unwholesome karmas, other than weighty, because of its being close to the time of death, that which is near death gives its result first. So he agrees with the order you get in the North Indian sources, and so you get both these orders in the Theravada. So we know now what the kind of ways in which a karma might take, a particular karma might come before the mind at the moment of death. The Theravadins, I can't find a parallel in the Sarvastivadin sources, of course have a theory about the mechanism of how this particular karma comes before the mind in terms of their theory of karma, sign of karma and sign of destiny. And what they mean by this is that at some point, very close to death, a karma can just present itself in a way in which you relive it. And this is the first example. The second example is that karma can present itself in the form of someone's trying to break in. It can present itself in the form of a sign, either a visual sign or an auditory sign. You imagine you hear something. So it can be the examples they give a gruesome one. You can imagine that if you're a butcher who killed pigs, as you're approaching death, the memory of these squealing pigs that you killed comes to mind. And this is a karma nimitta, and it's an occasion for you to, as it were, just before you die, relive the karma of killing pigs. But it can also be on the good side. You could hear suddenly the memory of monks chanting sutras might come to mind, so you can have a good karma nimitta. Or it could be a visual one. You remember the knife, like Macbeth or something, that you stabbed someone with, or a good sign as well. The interesting thing about the Karma nimitta is that it also has a variation where it can be something that you see in the world right at the time of your dying, which reminds you. And you can see here its religious importance. So in other words, when someone's dying, you can come in and show them flowers and say, we're going to offer these to the Buddha. These are the kinds of stories they give, and this can help. And then the final one, the sign of destiny, the Gati nimitta, is where you have some vision of where you're heading, either you see the flames of hell or the celestial mansions of the god. So there's nothing quite like that as I've been able to find in the Sarvastivadin accounts. I want to move then now to antarabhava, the intermediate existence. So the karma presents itself, you die. You're going to be reborn as a result of that particular karma that has become before the mind. Now the Theravadins say that you die and you are reborn in the very next moment. The death consciousness is followed immediately by the rebirth consciousness. A number of Buddhist schools followed that idea, and a number of them introduced, well, I shouldn't say introduced, had the idea of an immediate, intermediate existence. I just set out the tables like this, the schools that were pro and anti, split between Mahasanghika and Stavira, just to show that if we look at the list, as far as we can determine it, I mean, there are some problems. I mean, this is assuming, I put Dharmaguptaka here, this is assuming that the Shariputra Abhidharma Shastra is Dharmaguptaka. I put Bahushrutiya here, this is assuming that the Tattvasiddhi Shastra is Bahushrutiya. So there are problems with the list, it's a bit tentative. But it would seem that the division between who was pro and who was anti does not correspond to a Mahasanghika Stavira split, and it doesn't seem to correspond to a north-south split either in terms of it. So it's quite varied, and you've got this slightly odd thing. I mean, I'm following Barrow here, that early Mahishasaka seems to be anti-antarabhava, but late Mahishasaka seems to be pro. So there's a certain fluidity about these views. I can't remember exactly what the basis of Barrow's point there is, so I've just copied that at this point. So what's at stake here? How are they arguing? What's going on? Well, I'm just going to refer briefly to Indian philosophical Pramana theory, the means of knowledge, because this, I think, informs the arguments. So the primary means of knowledge in Indian theory, Indian philosophical theory, is direct perception. In the arguments about the intermediate existence, this is never invoked. Probably for the same reasons that it doesn't carry much weight so if I said I'd seen an intermediate existent being, you'd say, well, perhaps he just ate something or drank something. Interestingly, though, they do claim that intermediate existent beings are visible to people with the divya chakshu, the divine eye. But they don't invoke it in the argument. Then there's scriptural authority and inference or reason. Now, there are a number of sutra passages which both sides refer to, which potentially could be interpreted in either way, and they argue about. I'm not going to talk about those this evening. I want to talk about the third thing, the reasons, because this seems to be what's driving the arguments. Reason, anumana, or yukti. So I just want to say something about the intermediate existence as conceived. I mean, the primary source I'm using here is the Abhidharma Kosha. I mean, it is talked about in a number of different sources, but this is what I will refer to primarily. So intermediate existence concerns all beings with bodies. They all pass through an intermediate existence. So it's about rebirth it's about rebirth into an existence that entails a body, or from an existence that has a body to an existence that has a body. So this effectively covers all the types of rebirth that you find in the Buddhist lists, and well, actually beyond the Buddhist lists: egg-born, womb-born, moisture-born, and the spontaneously born. So they all have an intermediate existence. The only beings that are excluded from having an intermediate existence are formless beings. They have no body, so they don't need an intermediate existence. I'll just give you the characteristics. This is a compilation from the Abhidharma Kosha of the things that characterize the intermediate existence. So the intermediate existence, like your next life, is created by a single karma, and it's created by the same karma that is going to link to your next life. The being is said to be the size of, if we're talking, and it talks mostly about human beings, the being is said to be the size of a child of 5 or 6. Kamadhatu intermediate beings are naked by default, though there are stories of that's not always the case, of very virtuous and modest nuns who are clothed in the intermediate existence. Rupadhatu beings are very modest always, and are always clothed. The intermediate existent being is visible to intermediate beings of the same class, and also to anyone who has developed the divine eye. The intermediate being is moved by the force of the karma that is projecting it into its new existence, and a Buddha can't stop it. It has complete sense faculties, and it can pass through any physical obstacle. And this emphasis on it being moved by a force of karma, passing through obstacles, and not being able to be stopped, is indicative of what the intermediate existence is about. It's about dying in one place and having to travel to the place that you're going to be reborn. So that's primarily the question that it's trying to address or answer. How can you die in Bristol and be reborn in Palo Alto? So I died in Bristol and got on an aeroplane, and after 10 hours sitting there, it seemed a little bit like the intermediate existence. I got out feeling pretty dazed and jumped into a car, and here I am in Palo Alto. So that's how I got. But according to the Theravadins, there's no problem with someone dying in Bristol in one moment and the very next moment being reborn in Palo Alto. You don't need an Airbus to get you from A to B. So what else can we say about the intermediate existence? It feeds on smell. This is a play on the Gandharva. It consists of 5 or 3 aggregates, depending on whether it's in the sense realm or the form realm. And we've already had mention of the duration, though according to Vasubandhu, some say 49 days, others say 7 days, sometimes as long as it takes, an endless flight that goes on and on. Sometimes you can have a short time. Maybe it's to do with so there's long haul and short haul intermediate existence. So this is the basic idea of the intermediate existence. What we need to register here, though, is that it's an intermediate existence primarily because it's the result of karma. it's not an existence, because in existence you do things and create new karma. You do not create any karma or do anything in the intermediate existence. You're just kind of traveling. So it begins to sound more and more like being stuck on a long-haul flight. Sorry, this is a bit like near-death karma, because I've just got out of an airplane. It's on my mind. You see, I can't get rid of that thought. It's how it lingers with you. I want to go back to the Theravada account now. As I've said, for the Theravadins, it just happens like that. One moment you die, and the next moment you can be born anywhere in the world, or you don't have to travel to get there. And if we go to Buddhaghosa, there's one passage found in two places in the commentaries, basically the same passage repeated, which describes what happens, and it finishes off by emphasizing these particular illustrations, these nidassana in Pali. And it gives a number of them. The one that we will focus on is this one, the reflection, because this is the one that Vasubandhu takes up. So this word reflection, or nidassana I should say, again I think is a reference to Indian logic and reasoning in general. It's a term for an example or illustration. So it's often in the secondary literature, these have been referred to as similes, but it's important to understand that they're not offered as similes for what's happening. They're offered as examples or illustrations. So if you remember your Nyaya logic, it's very important in Indian reasoning and induction to be able to point at a concrete example. If you can't point at a concrete example, you can be defeated by your opponent. So you've got to come up with concrete examples. This is the classic one about the fire on a mountain because there's smoke, and then you have to have an example, like a kitchen. Obviously, ancient Indian kitchens are a little bit different from modern kitchens. Well, you still have fires occasionally, so it's not so the terminology is the same, and this is there are various words used for this stage in the syllogism, drishtanta or udaharana, but also nidarshana. And indeed, Vasubandhu used precisely the same terminologies, nidassana in Pali and then nidarshana in Sanskrit. So Vasubandhu, unlike the Theravadins, so when the Theravadins, this Buddhaghosa passage introduces rebirth and so forth, there is no mention of the fact that there is a dispute about the intermediate existence. It's just passed over, although it is well known that there's a dispute in Theravada sources because it's in the Katavattu. But Buddhaghosa mentions nothing about a dispute, but it's clear from what he says afterwards that he's conscious, or the author of this passage is conscious of the dispute, partly because he uses nidassana and gives these illustrations, because he's concerned to show that there are concrete examples of how you can have something happening in one place with an effect at a distance. And that's the whole point of the reflection, that you can have a face here and a mirror over there, and the face is reflected in a mirror. So there's causality across a distance. And this is meant to be an example of that. And this is brought home, so although Buddhaghosa doesn't mention the dispute, it's clear from the subsequent passage that he's worried about giving an account, that there is an account of causality at a distance. Vasubandhu, on the other hand, when he introduces antarabhava, immediately draws attention to the fact that some people deny it. And he immediately, though, brings in his illustration, example of how causality must be working when a being dies and then is reborn. And his example is rice. So this is the Karika and then the Bhashya. So for dharmas occurring in a series are seen to manifest in different places without interruption. For example, in the series of dharmas that is rice. Therefore, therefore, there is manifestation in the form of existence in different places without interruption in the case of the series of dharmas that is a being too. And this is made a little bit clearer by Yashomitra. I mean, the point is that you grow rice in one place, the grains are harvested, you pile them onto a cart, and then they go from village to village, and they can be planted somewhere else where they'll sprout. But the point is that in all the villages in between, there is manifestation, there is a rising of the Dharma series that constitutes the materiality of the rice. And so Vasubandhu is saying that this is necessary to explain rebirth. Vasubandhu rejects the notion of a reflection immediately after this. But he says, the interrupted appearance of dharmas is also seen, for example, the appearance of a reflection of an object in mirrors. The appearance of existence at rebirth from existence at death could be like this. But then he immediately says, but it is not established that what is called a reflection arises as a different instance of matter that is truly separate. And even if there was establishment, because it is not the same, it is not an example. It is not an example that fits. So he then tries to dispute or refute the idea that a reflection works as an illustration, an example of causality across a gap. And he does this by trying to show that a reflection is not a real thing. And he basically, his argument is that a reflection, the materiality of the mirror and the reflection appear to be in the same place. On Abhidharma terms, materiality cannot occupy the same space at the same time. Two different instances of matter cannot be in the same place at the same time. We know that the mirror is real and there and exists, so it must be the reflection that is not real, doesn't really exist. He then drives this point home by giving a couple of other examples which show that it is the reflection that is the unreal thing. I'll gloss over those. He then wants to argue also that even if a reflection were real, it doesn't fit the case of rebirth. And he does this in this kind of way. Oh no, sorry, I've jumped ahead slightly. This is a bit important for what I want to say about the Theravada response. This is his final argument about how we know that a reflection is not real. He first of all says it seems the reflection must be in the same place, but then he acknowledges that when you look in a mirror, the reflection seems to be behind the mirror in a different place. So it occurs, the reflection of the moon is observed hidden in another, like water in a well. But something arising on the mirrors should not be perceived somewhere else. Therefore, there is nothing there. And then he adds this sentence, which the Theravadins are going to use to get back at him. Yet the capacity of the combination of dharmas is such that this is how it looks. It looks as if it's there. It seems that he's not quite sure how to explain the appearance. For the difference in the capacities of dharmas is inconceivable. And then he goes on to argue, I haven't got a slide for his argument, so when he wants to argue also that a reflection doesn't fit as an example, and his basic argument here is that an example for rebirth has to be a single series, and a reflection, again he's sort of using Abhidharma terms, a reflection is not a single series, because there is the cause that is the face, but the primary cause is the materiality of the mirror. And this, I think, is referencing Indian theories probably Nyaya theories of causality, where you have a substantial cause which is seen as the materiality is taken as the substantial primary cause. And so because the reflection is on the mirror, this is the primary cause. So you haven't got a single series. So it's a messy thing, and he thinks it doesn't fit. So I'm now going to just say something about the Theravada response. I've left this a bit too late. This is my discovery. In the Theravada Pali Tika subcommentarial literature is perhaps one of the most unexplored, certainly it's the most unexplored aspect of Pali literature, but it's also up there. I mean, there's lots of unexplored stuff in the field of Buddhist studies and texts and people that's unread and not looked at. But the Tika literature is particularly neglected. And there is nothing in the intermediate state dispute is mentioned in the Kathavatu. There's nothing in the commentary on the Kathavatu. There's nothing in the first sub-commentary, the so-called Mula Tika. But in the Anutika, a text that was probably written at the end of the 6th century or the beginnings of the 7th century, there is a relatively long, 3.5 pages comment on the intermediate existence in quite technical Pali. And I think that no one, as far as I know, someone may tell me that I'm wrong here, has ever noticed that the person, Dhammapala probably, who wrote that Anutika, had in front of him the Abhidharma Kosha. He doesn't mention the Abhidharma Kosha by name, but he is clearly more or less quoting it in places and follows the argument more or less exactly. So this is quite, I must confess, I found this rather interesting to kind of have this evidence that the Abhidharma Kosha was present in presuming that Dhammapala wrote in Sri Lanka rather than South India, in the, at the end of the 6th century, early 7th century. So Dhammapala takes issue with Vasubandhu and his argument. He rehearses the argument. He accepts that two forms of materiality cannot exist in the same place. But he then argues that it just appears as if they're in the same place. So he now has to try and give an example. He's again about Nidassana, giving an illustration, example. Another example of where he's trying to find an example where we know that there are two different things, but that they appear as if they're in the same place. And unfortunately, I'm not sure that I fully understand his example, which is a bit of a... So he says, take the materiality that constitutes the radiance of many Manipadipa. Now, I looked up Manipadipa in Monia Williams, and it says it's a type of lamp with a jewel instead of a wick. And I'm not sure what that is. And I haven't had much chance to pursue it. I don't know whether anyone knows what it means. I did think about taking it as some kind of dwanda, the jewels and lamps together. I don't know. But never mind that. The main point he seems to be making is the radiance occurs in one place because of its not being divided and because of its being constant. It appears as if it is not in different locations, yet since it is material, since its material supports are different, it is certainly in different locations. There is merely this absence of difference in location because of the peculiarity of perception. We should consider the case of the material that is like the mirror and the material that is the reflection in the same way. So he thinks that he's got a counter-example there, if we could quite understand what a Manipadipa was. But obviously it's the mingling of radiance from different light sources, I think, is the kind of idea, or reflected light sources, I'm not sure. There are a number of places where he quotes Vasubandhu, but this is the most obvious one. This is the place where he then tries to turn, doesn't mention him by name, but he says, remember this in bold is basically in Pali, a verbatim quote translation into Pali of what Vasubandhu says. The terminology is very same, the words are almost exact. For this is precisely the point established by someone arguing that the capacity of the collective of dharmas is, however, such that this is how it looks for the variety of the capacity of dharmas is inconceivable. Because even though something has a different material support, it appears not to have a different location. Precisely by this, the objection that the material that constitutes a reflection in water and so on does not exist should be understood as refuted. So Dhammapala goes on in a similar vein. I will pass over, these are some quotes that illustrate his, the parallels between the two sources. Again, Dhammapala sums up, it's perhaps worth using a summary. In this way, the aggregates at relinking manifest by the combination of different conditions in the location of rebirth immediately upon the cessation of the aggregates at death. So there is no intermediate existence. And when it does not exist, what some say in explanation of its cause and form, etc., namely, that its form is that of the first period of its future existence as a result of the karma that is producing that future existence, that it is visible to beings of the same type and by the purified divine eye, that its sense faculties are complete, that it proceeds unhindered by any being, that it feeds on smell, that should be understood as like arguing whether the son of a barren woman is short or tall. Classic, again, Indian refutation, the example of a non-existent thing, the son of a barren woman. I need to draw my remarks to a close. I mean, in conclusion, I just want to draw attention to a couple of points. I think the dispute about the intermediate existence is driven by theoretical concerns and reasons, not really by religious concerns. The intermediate existence, unlike the kind of later Tibetan bardo, is not a kind of last chance to change your destiny. Once you're there, you're going to end up where you're heading. You can't, as it were, jump out of the plane mid-flight and parachute somewhere else. You're heading there. Your last chance to change things around is connected with this idea of near-death karma in both traditions. It's interesting that the intermediate existence is largely a kind of this passive state. You just sit there until you wait until you arrive, though you do seem to get a little bit restless at the end. I can't resist by not giving you the final thing from Vasubandhu, this famous passage. So, for even if the intermediate being is a long way away, with vision that is the product of the force of karma, he sees the place of his birth. There the being sees its mother and father engaged in copulation. If the being is male, a male desire for the mother arises. If female, a female desire for the father arises, along with the inverse aversion. As it says in the Prajñapti, at that time the Gandharva has two opposed thoughts, one accompanied by attraction, the other by aversion. Disturbed by these two opposing thoughts, it is drawn to that place out of a desire for sexual pleasure and imagines that it is the one who is engaged in sex. Thrilled, the being becomes immersed in the impurity inside the womb. As a result, the skandhas of the new existence become set, while the skandhas of the intermediate existence disappear, and so the being is reborn. So the other thing, I hope I've been able to bring out a little bit of this exchange between North and South, and that there's sometimes a problem that we get a better understanding of what's going on when we do look at the Theravada sources and Pali sources alongside the northern sources, and that we should resist and try and do that more rather than kind of be stuck in one area or not. And I think this, for me at any rate, the Dhammapala passage was something exciting to find that commentary on this dispute. So I've gone on for rather a long time, so I would let you come from your bardo, intermediate existence of being in the audience and be reborn into a new life, and hope you have some questions. Thank you.